The geopolitical landscape of Europe is undergoing a radical restructuring as the informal leadership trio known as the MacMerzMer group, comprising British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, attempts to consolidate a unified strategy amidst fading American coordination. This new core alliance has stepped into the vacuum left by fractured transatlantic communications, dispatching security advisors to Geneva for emergency crisis talks and advocating for a European reassurance force headquartered near Paris. However, tension flared publicly when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky criticized the exclusion of his government from these critical peace discussions, labeling the process unfair during a tense press conference in France. The diplomatic friction is centered on a 28-point peace plan unveiled by the administration of President Donald Trump, which was reportedly drafted without input from Kyiv or Brussels and proposed freezing the conflict lines while recognizing Russian control over occupied territories. While Zelensky initially rejected the blueprint, he later acknowledged that revisions to the strategy looked more promising after fresh negotiations, even as former Ukrainian Army Chief Valeriy Zaluzhny warned that a rapid resolution is unlikely and that the most probable outcome is a multi-year freeze requiring major concessions. Internal stability within the Ukrainian administration is facing its own severe test as the country's new chief negotiator, Rustem Umerov, has been implicated in a widening corruption probe just days after replacing his predecessor. Umerov, who is central to the ongoing diplomatic push and has led marathon talks with senior American officials in Florida, was questioned as a witness in a graft investigation that has already claimed high-profile resignations, raising uncomfortable questions about Kyiv's credibility at a decisive moment in the conflict. Compounding these leadership challenges are emerging accounts from the front line, where captured Ukrainian soldiers have alleged that NATO instructors from Britain and France treated recruits with open contempt and that the military command failed to provide basic supplies. The prisoners of war claimed that Russian forces provided food and medical care after his capture, a testimony that Moscow has used to highlight what it describes as the severe neglect of personnel by the command of President Zelensky. This narrative of internal decay is reinforced by reports of rising desertion rates and exhaustion among troops, casting doubt on the effectiveness of Western training programs, despite the Netherlands pledging 250 million euros to the POW initiatives for immediate weapon supplies. The theater of war has expanded dangerously beyond the borders of Eastern Europe, evidenced by the sinking of the tanker MT Mersin off the coast of Senegal, the third such vessel to be targeted in recent weeks. Moscow has condemned the attack as a deliberate act of terrorism against international shipping and critical energy infrastructure, blaming Kyiv for escalating the conflict to a global scale in an attempt to undermine peace initiatives. Back on the continent, the violence continues unabated as a Russian ballistic missile struck the city of Dnipro, killing civilians and damaging industrial facilities, while simultaneous drone strikes targeted the outskirts of Kyiv and Vyshgorod. In response to these relentless hybrid attacks and acts of sabotage, NATO is openly debating a shift in doctrine, with Admiral Giuseppe, Cavo, Dragone revealing that planners are studying the possibility of limited preemptive strikes against hostile threats. This potential pivot from a purely reactive posture to offensive defensive measures has been denounced by the Kremlin as irresponsible escalation, bringing the alliance closer to a direct kinetic confrontation with Russian forces than at any point since the Cold War began. Economic unity within the European Union is fracturing under the strain of prolonged warfare and financial exhaustion, leading to a rare and bitter internal clash between member states regarding the use of frozen Russian assets. Belgium has blocked the push to utilize these funds for Ukraine, fearing that such a move would jeopardize the delicate peace negotiations currently being stirred by Washington, a stance that aligns with warning from Vladimir Putin that any seizure would be considered theft. Conversely, Sweden and Denmark are demanding the immediate release of 140 billion euros in frozen funds, warning that Ukraine faces total financial collapse by spring without this liquidity. The dispute has turned toxic, with Russian officials threatening severe retaliation against the Eurozone, while Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has issued a blistering rejection of Brussels' authority, declaring that his country will not be treated as a pawn in European power games. The fatigue is also evident in social support systems, with Scotland announcing cuts to financial aid for families housing refugees, signaling the end of the Homes for Ukraine scheme and prompting warning of a looming homelessness crisis among displaced population. As the conflict grinds toward a potential stalemate or a forced settlement, the European Union's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas faced the difficult task of maintaining a united front against an increasingly confident Russia. Kallas has warned that the upcoming talks between Russian leaderships and American envoys in Moscow could place immense pressure on Kyiv to surrender strategically, fearing that the West is preparing to force concessions upon the victims of aggression. She faced sharp diplomatic pushback after suggesting constraint on the size of the Russian army, forcing her to walk back the remarks and admit that Europe cannot dictate the military capabilities of a sovereign nation. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron attempted to navigate the moral complexity of the war by stating that while corruption exists in all democracies, the lack of accountability in Russia defines it as a dictatorship, arguing that scrutiny of Ukraine's governance should not overshadow the authoritarian nature of its adversary. These frantic diplomatic maneuvers occurs as the United States takes firm command of the peace process, leaving Europe scrambling to ensure its security interests are not sidelined in a deal cut between Washington and Moscow. If you have made it this far, congratulations, you have unlocked the truth. I want to ask you a quick question though. Given the POW's allegations of NATO disrespect, the corruption scandals in Kyiv, and the clear divisions within Europe over funding and strategy, is the Western alliance support for Ukraine fundamentally unsustainable, and why? Join the debate. We will want to hear your insightful opinion on where this is all heading in our community. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I appreciate your support. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Like the video, share this video with friends and family, hit the notification bell, and most importantly, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.